The flowers were wilting in Whitney's hands as she stood at her father's grave. What she was about to tell him would finally set them both free. But first, she had to find the courage to say the words that had been trapped in her heart for 8 long months. If you've ever lost a parent before saying everything you needed to say, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to hear about the power of forgiveness, even when it comes too late. October 15th, 2004. The autumn air in Fairview Cemetery carried the scent of dying leaves and distant rain. Whitney Elizabeth Houston stood alone before a simple granite headstone that read John Russell Houston Jr., loving father, devoted husband. She'd driven here from her hotel in Newark without telling anyone. Not her bodyguard, not her manager, not even her mother Sissy. This conversation had been 8 months in the making. In her hands, she clutched a bouquet of white roses, his favorite flowers. The same ones he used to bring home every Friday when she was little, back when their relationship was simple, back when she was just his baby girl who sang in the church choir. Not the global superstar who'd conquered the world, but somehow lost her way home. "Hi, Daddy," Whitney whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "I know it's been a while since I've been here. I know I should have come sooner, but—" Her voice cracked, and she took a deep breath. "But I wasn't ready to have this conversation." The wind picked up, scattering fallen leaves across the pristine cemetery grounds. Whitney pulled her black cashmere coat tighter around her shoulders, but the chill she felt wasn't from the October air. It was from the weight of everything left unsaid between them. She'd been 20 months clean from drugs, rebuilding her life piece by piece, but there was one wound that wouldn't heal. The last conversation she'd had with her father in February 2003, just weeks before he suffered the heart attack that would take him away forever. They'd argued about Bobby, about money, about choices she was making. She'd hung up on him, angry and defensive. "You never lived to see me get clean, Daddy," Whitney said, kneeling down to place the roses against the headstone. "You died thinking I was still that lost woman who'd thrown her life away. But I need you to know something. Everything you tried to teach me, everything you worried about, everything you warned me about, you were right." But what Whitney didn't know was that her father had left something behind that would change everything she believed about their relationship. The memories flooded back as she sat on the cold ground beside his grave. John Russell Houston Jr. had been a Newark City employee, an Army veteran, a deacon at New Hope Baptist Church. He'd married Sissy and inherited her talented daughter, raising Whitney as his own with a firm hand and an even firmer set of expectations. "Remember when I was 8 and I told you I wanted to be famous?" Whitney said, tracing his name on the headstone with her finger. "You said, 'Baby girl, fame is like fire. It can warm your house or burn it down. The difference is how you tend it.' I thought I knew what you meant back then, but I didn't really understand until it was too late." John had been protective of Whitney from the moment she showed signs of exceptional talent. When record executives started sniffing around the church when she was a teenager, John had been skeptical. When Clive Davis offered her a recording contract, John had insisted on reading every word of the fine print. When Whitney became the biggest pop star in the world in the 1980s, John had worried about the price she was paying for success. "You never trusted the music industry, did you?" Whitney continued, her eyes filling with tears. "You used to say, 'These people don't care about you, Whitney. They care about what you can do for them.' I got so mad at you for saying that. I thought you were just being negative, that you didn't understand the business. But you understood it better than I did." The wind carried the sound of distant traffic from the highway, mixing with the gentle rustling of leaves in the oak trees that surrounded the cemetery. Whitney reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was a letter she'd written to her father when she was 12 years old, after their first real argument about her future. "I found this in my old room at Mama's house," she said, unfolding the letter carefully. "Listen to what I wrote. Dear Daddy, I know you worry about me singing for people who aren't from our church. But God gave me this voice to share with the world. Don't you think He wants me to use it to touch as many hearts as possible?" "Do you remember what you wrote back?" Whitney's voice broke as she pulled out another piece of paper, her father's response, written in his careful handwriting 28 years ago. "My dear Whitney," she read aloud, her voice trembling, "God did give you an extraordinary voice. But he also gave you to me and your mother to protect. The world is hungry for light, but sometimes it devours the very people who try to bring that light. I don't want the world to devour my little girl. If you're going to share your gift, do it on your terms, not theirs. Remember who you are, remember where you come from, and never let anyone convince you that their approval is worth more than your soul. Whitney pressed the letter against her chest and sobbed. You tried to warn me, Daddy. You tried so hard to protect me from everything I ended up falling into. The drugs, the toxic relationship, the people who only wanted to use me. You saw it coming from a mile away, and I was too stubborn to listen. She thought about all the times John had tried to intervene in her relationship with Bobby Brown, how he'd pulled her aside during family gatherings, expressing his concerns about Bobby's influence on her life, how he'd watched helplessly as his daughter's light dimmed under the weight of addiction and domestic drama. Remember Christmas 2001? Whitney said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. You pulled me into the kitchen while everyone else was opening presents. You looked so worried, Daddy. You said, baby girl, this isn't who you are. The Whitney I raised would never let anyone dim her light like this. I got so defensive. I accused you of not supporting my marriage, of trying to control my life. That confrontation had created a rift between them that had never fully healed. John had watched from the sidelines as Whitney's career derailed, as her voice suffered, as her personal life became tabloid fodder. He'd tried to reach out, but Whitney had pulled away, ashamed of what she'd become and unable to face his disappointment. But Whitney was about to discover that her father's disappointment wasn't the whole story. There was something else, something that would reshape everything she thought she knew about their relationship. Mama told me something after the funeral that I haven't been able to process, Whitney continued, her voice gaining strength. She said that every night for the last 5 years of your life, you prayed for me. Not just quick prayers, Daddy. You got down on your knees in your bedroom and prayed for hours. You prayed for my safety, for my healing, for my return to the light. Mama said she'd find you sometimes at 3 in the morning, still on your knees, still talking to God about me. The revelation had shattered Whitney's understanding of her father's final years. She'd thought he'd given up on her, thought he'd written her off as a lost cause. But according to Sissy, John had never stopped fighting for his daughter, even when she'd stopped fighting for herself. She said you had a whole box of newspaper clippings about me, Whitney said, laughing through her tears. Not just the good ones, Daddy, all of them, even the ones from the worst times. You kept track of everything, even when I wasn't talking to you. Why didn't you tell me you were still in my corner? Why did you let me think you'd given up on me? She remembered the last time she'd seen him healthy, at a family barbecue in the summer of 2002. She'd shown up late, obviously under the influence of something, and John had barely spoken to her. She'd interpreted his silence as judgment, as rejection, but now she wondered if it had been something else entirely. Maybe it had been heartbreak. I need to tell you about the night you died, Whitney said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I was in Los Angeles, in rehab. They wouldn't let me come home for the funeral because I was just starting treatment. I was so angry, Daddy. I was angry at you for leaving before I could get clean. I was angry at myself for not being there when you had the heart attack. But mostly I was angry because I thought you died disappointed in me. The night John died, Whitney had been only 3 weeks into her rehabilitation program. She'd been detoxing, fighting withdrawal symptoms, trying to rebuild her shattered psyche one day at a time. When the call came from Sissy, Whitney had begged the facility to let her go home. They'd refused, saying she wasn't stable enough to handle the emotional trauma of a funeral. I want you to know that night changed everything for me, Whitney continued. I was lying in that narrow bed in rehab, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things I'd never get to say to you. That's when I decided I was going to get clean for real this time. Not for my career, not for Bobby, not even for Bobby Christina. I was going to get clean so that when I saw you again someday, I could look you in the eye and tell you that I remembered who I was, that I found my way back to the light you tried to protect. Whitney reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something that made her start crying all over again. A small tape recorder that had belonged to her father. Mama gave me this last week, she said, holding up the device. She found it in your desk drawer when she was cleaning out your office. Daddy, there's something on here that you recorded for me. Mama said you made it right after your first heart attack in 2001, when you thought you might not make it through surgery. She said you told her not to give it to me unless I got clean and stayed clean for at least a year. Whitney's hands shook as she pressed play. Her father's voice, warm and familiar, filled the quiet cemetery air. Whitney, baby girl, if you're hearing this, it means you found your way back to yourself. It means the prayers worked. It means God answered an old man's desperate request to save his daughter. I need you to know something, sweetheart. I was never disappointed in you. I was disappointed in the people who failed to protect you. I was disappointed in myself for not knowing how to reach you when you were drowning. But you, my beautiful, talented, gifted daughter, you never disappointed me, not for one single day. Whitney clutched the tape player to her chest, sobbing as her father's voice continued. I know you think I didn't approve of your choices. I know you think I was angry about your music career, about Bobby, about all of it. But baby girl, I wasn't angry at you. I was afraid for you. There's a difference, and I should have done a better job of helping you understand that difference. Everything I said, everything I did came from a place of love and terror. Terror that the world would break my little girl's spirit. Terror that fame would steal your joy. Terror that I'd raised you to be too trusting, too generous, too open-hearted for an industry that eats people alive. The recording paused for a moment, and Whitney could hear her father taking a shaky breath. I want you to know that every song you sang, every stage you conquered, every barrier you broke down as a black woman in music, I was proud. So proud I couldn't even put it into words. You did things I never dreamed were possible. You touched lives all over the world. You used the voice God gave you exactly the way it was meant to be used, to heal, to inspire, to bring joy. The fact that the journey got hard doesn't diminish what you accomplished. It just makes you human. Whitney realized she was about to hear something that would change her understanding of her father's love forever. I need to apologize to you, Whitney, her father's voice continued. I should have told you more often how proud I was. I should have celebrated your victories louder than I voiced my concerns. I should have trusted that the foundation your mother and I gave you would be strong enough to survive any storm. I was so focused on protecting you that I forgot to tell you that you didn't need protecting. You were always strong enough to handle whatever came your way. You just needed to remember that strength was inside you all along. Whitney was crying so hard she could barely breathe. All the guilt she'd carried, all the shame about disappointing her father, all the regret about their unfinished conversations. It was melting away with each word he'd recorded for her. The voice isn't just what comes out of your mouth when you sing, baby girl. The voice is who you are when you stand up for what's right. The voice is how you love your daughter. The voice is the kindness you show to strangers. The voice is the courage you found to fight your way back to health. That voice has never been broken. That voice has always been perfect. That voice is the reason I can rest in peace. The recording ended with her father singing softly, the same gospel hymn he used to sing to her when she was little, the one about God's grace being sufficient for all our troubles. Whitney sat in the silence for a long time, holding the tape player and watching the sun begin to set behind the Newark skyline. The city where she'd been born, where she'd learned to sing in church, where her parents had raised her to believe she could do anything. The city she'd left behind in her rush to conquer the world, but that had never really left her heart. I get it now, Daddy, she said finally. You weren't trying to hold me back. You were trying to make sure I never forgot who I was underneath all the fame and success and chaos. You were trying to give me an anchor so I wouldn't drift away from myself. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. She stood up and brushed the dirt off her coat, looking down at his gravestone one more time. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice strong and clear now. I'm going to be okay, better than okay. I'm going to use everything I learned from losing my way to help other people find theirs. I'm going to sing again, but differently this time. I'm going to sing like the woman you raised me to be, not like the product the industry tried to turn me into. I'm going to make you proud in ways that really matter. Whitney began to sing then, softly at first, then with growing power. the same gospel hymn her father had sung on the recording, the one that spoke of grace and redemption and coming home. Her voice soared across the cemetery, pure and strong and free of the pain that had clouded it for so many years. As the last note faded into the evening air, Whitney felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. The conversation was finally finished. The forgiveness from him, from herself, was finally complete. What Whitney did next would honor her father's memory and change the trajectory of her remaining years. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, dialing a number she hadn't called in months. "Mama," she said when Sissy answered. "It's me. I'm at Daddy's grave, and I'm ready to come home. Not just to visit. I mean, really come home. I want to move back to Newark. I want to work at the church again. I want to teach young singers how to protect their voices and their souls. I want to do what Daddy would have wanted me to do with this second chance." Sissy was quiet for a moment. Then Whitney could hear her mother crying softly. "He'd be so proud of you, baby," Sissy whispered. "He'd be so proud." Whitney looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I know, Mama. I can feel it. For the first time in years, I can feel his pride instead of his worry. And you know what? It feels just like it did when I was 8 years old, singing in church. And he'd smile at me from the congregation like I was the most precious thing in the world." She ended the call and stood in the cemetery for another few minutes, memorizing the moment. Then she walked back to her car, leaving the white roses on her father's grave and carrying his love with her into whatever came next. The drive back to her hotel took her through the streets of Newark where she'd grown up, past New Hope Baptist Church where she'd first learned to sing, past the houses where her voice had been nurtured and protected and celebrated. For the first time in years, Whitney Houston was exactly where she belonged, at peace with her past, proud of her journey, and ready to use her voice, all of it, not just the singing, to light the way for others. The daughter's last goodbye had become her first hello to the rest of her life. And somewhere, in the space between earth and heaven, John Russell Houston Jr. was finally able to rest, knowing his baby girl had found her way back to the light. 6 months later, Whitney would establish the John Russell Houston Foundation for Young Artists, dedicated to providing mentorship and protection for talented young people entering the entertainment industry. She'd teach them not just how to sing, but how to survive success without losing themselves, how to tend the fire of fame without letting it burn down their houses, how to use their voices to heal the world while keeping their souls intact. As Whitney walked back to her car that evening, she felt lighter than she had in years. The guilt that had weighed on her shoulders for 8 months was gone, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: pure, unconditional love. She paused at the cemetery gate and looked back one more time at her father's grave, now bathed in moonlight. The white roses she'd left there seemed to glow in the darkness, a symbol of the peace she'd finally found. For the first time since his death, Whitney could picture her father's face without seeing disappointment or worry. Instead, she saw the man who used to braid her hair before church, who taught her how to ride a bicycle, who would sit in the front row of every school concert and beam with pride when she sang. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered into the night air. "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. Thank you for loving me enough to keep praying when I couldn't pray anymore. I promise I'll make the rest of my life count for something beautiful." A shooting star streaked across the Newark sky, and Whitney smiled through her tears. Some conversations, she realized, don't end with death. They just move to a different realm where love speaks louder than words ever could. It was exactly what her father had always hoped she would do. It was exactly who he had always known she could become. And every time she worked with a young artist, every time she helped someone navigate the treacherous waters of fame while holding on to their authenticity, Whitney could feel her father's presence. Not his worry this time, but his pride. Deep, abiding, unconditional pride in the woman his little girl had become. The conversation was finally complete. The circle was finally closed. The voice, in all its forms, was finally, truly free. If this story of forgiveness and finding peace moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of a parent's love that transcends death itself. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories about the human side of music's greatest legends.